Hi, my name is Victoria Harrison. 3 years ago, I wasn't just humiliated by my husband's family. I was degraded, dismissed, and treated like hired help in my own marriage. They saw me as nothing more than Derek's poor little wife, the charity, case he'd rescued from obscurity. They had no idea that while they were busy looking down on me, I was quietly building an empire that would eventually swallow theirs whole. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tonight isn't about revenge. It's about justice. It's about what happens when you underestimate the wrong woman for too long. But before I tell you how I brought down the Harrison dynasty from the inside, let me ask you this. If your in-laws treated you like a servant while sitting on a throne built on lies, would you serve them dinner, or would you serve them their walking papers? The Colorado winter wind cut through downtown Denver like a blade, rattling the floor-to-ceiling windows of my 20th floor loft as I stood in my kitchen, staring at an envelope that had arrived with the afternoon mail. The return address was embossed in gold lettering, Harrison Industries, Executive Office. My stomach tightened as I recognized Patricia Harrison's distinctive handwriting across the front, each letter formed with the kind of precision that spoke of decades spent perfecting the art of looking superior. I set down my coffee mug, the ceramic making a soft clink against the granite countertop, and reached for the envelope with hands that had learned not to tremble anymore. 3 years of marriage to Derek had taught me many things, but perhaps the most valuable lesson was how to keep my composure when his family aimed their particular brand of cruelty in my direction. The invitation inside was printed on paper so thick it felt like parchment, announcing the Harrison family's annual Christmas dinner at the estate. But it wasn't the formal script that made my breath catch. It was the handwritten note tucked behind it, penned in Patricia's sharp cursive. Victoria, we'll need you to help coordinate the serving this year. The staff will be reduced for the holidays, and we know you understand the importance of family pulling together. Please arrive at 3 p.m. to assist with preparations. I read it twice, then a third time, each word sinking deeper into the quiet fury that had been building in my chest for months. Not an invitation, instructions, not a request for help, an assumption that I would, once again, play the role of grateful daughter-in-law who jumped at the chance to serve the Harrison dynasty. My phone buzzed against the counter, Derek's name flashing across the screen. I let it ring twice before answering, my voice carefully neutral. Hey, honey. Vic. Did you get Mom's note about Christmas dinner? His tone carried that familiar mixture of resignation and hope, the sound of a man who'd spent 34 years trying to navigate between his wife and his mother. I know it's not ideal, but maybe if we just help serve dinner to your family, like I'm part of the catering staff? I finished, walking to the window where the city lights were just beginning to flicker on in the early December dusk. Again? There was a pause, long enough for me to hear the sound of his office door closing in the background. Derek worked for his father's company, Harrison Industries, in a middle management position that carried an impressive title but little real authority. The golden handcuffs, as he sometimes called it, though never when his parents might overhear. She doesn't mean it like that, he said finally, but even he sounded unconvinced. You know how she gets about traditions and making sure everything's perfect. Perfect. As if there was anything perfect about the way his family treated me. I'd spent the last 3 Christmases watching Patricia Harrison orchestrate elaborate dinner parties where I was expected to help serve, clear plates, and smile graciously while listening to conversations about people and places I supposedly wouldn't understand. Meanwhile, Natalie, Marcus's wife, sat at the table looking decorative and offering occasional commentary about her latest charity board appointment. I'll be there, I said, because what else could I say? Derek's relationship with his family was complicated enough without me making it worse. 3 o'clock. Thank you, he breathed, relief evident in his voice. I know this isn't easy, but I appreciate you doing this for us. For us. As if I had any choice in the matter. After Derek hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and settled into my home office. A sleek space dominated by 3 monitors and filing cabinets that contained the real story of my life. The story the Harrison family had never bothered to learn because they were too busy assuming they already knew everything about me. I opened my laptop and pulled up the secure folder labeled Meridian Holdings, my investment company that had been quietly acquiring assets across Colorado for the past 2 years. The shell corporation was registered under my maiden name, Victoria Chen, a detail that had proven remarkably useful in keeping my business activities separate from my role as Derek's wife. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Patricia Harrison had been treating me like an undereducated housewife who'd somehow tricked her precious son into marriage, I'd been systematically building a portfolio worth more than the Harrison family's annual revenue. My Wharton MBA, earned on scholarship before I met Derek, had apparently been too insignificant to mention at family gatherings where everyone assumed I'd barely finished high school. I scrolled through my recent acquisitions, each one carefully chosen and strategically positioned. The real estate development company that held the lease on Harrison Industries' main manufacturing facility. The logistics firm that handled their supply chain operations. The small but crucial tech startup that had developed the inventory management system their entire operation depended on. Piece by piece, I'd been positioning myself at the foundation of their empire, waiting for the right moment to reveal just how much power the quiet little wife in the corner actually held. My phone rang again, this time showing Carmen Rodriguez's name. My best friend since college, Carmen was one of the few people who knew the full scope of what I'd been building over the past few years. "Please tell me you're not actually going to play waitress for those people again," Carmen said without preamble when I answered. "Hello to you too," I replied, but I was smiling despite myself. Carmen had never liked Derek's family. Not since the first time she'd witnessed Patricia's particular brand of condescension at our wedding 3 years ago. "I'm serious, Vic. You're worth more than their entire company, and they have you arranging centerpieces and refilling water glasses like you're some kind of hired help." "Not for much longer," I said quietly, my eyes returning to the screen where my latest acquisition proposal sat waiting for final approval. Harrison Industries itself, the family's crown jewel, built by Derek's grandfather and passed down through 2 generations of increasingly poor financial decisions. "What do you mean, not for much longer?" I took a sip of wine, savoring both the taste and the moment. "Carmen, what would you say if I told you that by New Year's I'll own controlling interest in Harrison Industries?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 10 seconds before Carmen's voice returned, pitched an octave higher than usual. "I'd say you've been holding out on me. How is that even possible?" Richard Harrison expanded too, aggressively in the last 5 years, I explained. Pulling up the company's financial records that I'd been analyzing for months, they leveraged themselves to the limit buying up smaller competitors, and now they're cash poor despite looking successful on paper. The bank is calling in their primary loan next month, and they don't have the liquidity to cover it. "And you do?" "I do. Through Meridian Holdings, I'm prepared to offer them a buyout that will clear their debt and keep the company operational. In exchange, I get 71% ownership and a controlling stake in the board of directors." Carmen whistled low. "And they have no idea it's you?" "None whatsoever. As far as they know, Victoria Harrison is just Derek's mysteriously unemployed wife who somehow manages to afford nice clothes and a downtown loft on his middle management salary. The truth was more complex, of course. I'd been careful to maintain the fiction of financial dependence while building my real wealth through careful investments and strategic acquisitions. Derek knew I'd had some money saved when we married, enough to contribute to our lifestyle, but he'd never questioned the source or the amount. His family had simply assumed I was living off his income and whatever modest trust fund a girl from my background might have inherited. They'd never bothered to ask about my education, my work experience, or my long-term goals. In their minds, I was a pretty face Derek had met at a coffee shop, someone who'd won the lottery by catching the attention of a Harrison man. The fact that I'd been meeting with venture capitalists and private equity firms while they thought I spent my days shopping and getting my nails done had never occurred to them. "So what's the timeline?" Carmen asked. "When do you drop this bomb?" "The acquisition goes through on December 28th, I said, checking my calendar. "The loan comes due January 2nd, which means they'll be scrambling to find financing. Between Christmas and New Year's, I'll have controlling interest before most people are back in their offices." And then, I stood up and walked back to the kitchen, where Patricia's invitation still lay on the counter like a declaration of war written in calligraphy. "And then, Carmen, I'm going to make some changes, starting with who serves dinner to whom." The conversation with Carmen left me energized in a way I hadn't felt in months. For too long, I'd been playing the part of the accommodating daughter-in-law, biting my tongue while Patricia made subtle digs about my background, and Marcus treated me like an amusing pet Derek had brought home. The careful balance I'd maintained between my real life and my Harrison family life was finally about to collapse, and I found myself looking forward to the destruction. I spent the evening going through my files, double-checking every detail of the acquisition plan that would reshape the Harrison family's world in just over 3 weeks. The legal documents were flawless, reviewed by 3 different law firms to ensure there were no loopholes or escape clauses. My financing was solid, backed by assets they couldn't touch and cash reserves they couldn't imagine. But more than the money, more than the legal maneuvering, I had something they'd never expected from Derek's quiet little wife: patience. 3 years of Christmas dinners where I'd smiled and served drinks, 3 years of family gatherings where I'd been introduced as Derek's wife, while Natalie got the full biography treatment complete with her charity work and social connections. 3 years of watching them pat themselves on the back for allowing their precious Derek to marry beneath his station. The next morning brought 6 inches of fresh snow and a text from Derek asking if I needed help getting to the estate early for dinner preparations. I replied that I could manage, then spent an hour in my walk-in closet selecting the perfect outfit for what would be my final performance as the grateful daughter-in-law. I chose a simple black dress, elegant but not too expensive looking, paired with the diamond earrings Derek had given me for our first anniversary. To the Harrison family, I would look appropriately dressed for someone helping with dinner service. They would never guess that the dress was custom-tailored by a designer who'd created gowns for Fortune 500 CEOs, or that the earrings had been purchased not by Derek, but by me, as a reward for closing my first major acquisition. As I put on my jewelry, I caught sight of my reflection in the bedroom mirror. 3 years ago, I'd been genuinely nervous about fitting in with Derek's family, worried that my middle-class background would show despite my education and professional success. I'd worked so hard to be the version of myself they might approve of that I'd almost forgotten who I really was underneath. But that woman looking back at me now was different, sharper, more focused. She'd learned to smile while calculating the exact cost of every slight, every dismissive comment, every assumption about her worth. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from an unknown number. "Ms. Chen, final documents ready for your review. Acquisition complete pending your signature." "Congratulations." I smiled, the expression feeling more genuine than any I'd worn in the Harrison family's presence. Mr. Thompson, my acquisition attorney, was nothing if not efficient. By this time tomorrow, I would own the company that had made the Harrison family fortune. I would control their income, their legacy, and their future. I looked at Patricia's invitation one more time, then tucked it into my purse. 3 o'clock couldn't come soon enough. The drive to the Harrison estate took 45 minutes through Denver's afternoon traffic, giving me plenty of time to mentally prepare for what would likely be my final performance as the accommodating in-law. The family's house sat on 12 acres in Highlands Ranch, a sprawling Tudor-style mansion that had been featured in Denver's luxury home magazines more than once. As I pulled through the wrought iron gates and up the circular driveway, I could see Patricia through the front windows, directing what appeared to be a small army of caterers and florists. The scene was quintessentially Patricia Harrison, every detail orchestrated to perfection, every element designed to reinforce the family's image of effortless sophistication. I parked next to Marcus's Tesla and gathered my purse, taking a moment to center myself before walking up to the front door. The woman who would ring that doorbell was still Derek's accommodating wife, ready to help serve dinner and smile at jokes that weren't funny. The woman who would leave this house in a few hours would be something else entirely. Patricia opened the door before I could knock, her smile bright and welcoming in the way that always made me slightly nervous. "Victoria, darling, perfect timing. Come in, come in." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We have so much to prepare before everyone arrives. I stepped into the marble foyer, breathing in the familiar scent of expensive candles and fresh flowers. The house always smelled like money, a combination of luxury and careful maintenance that spoke of generations of wealth. "Derek's running late at the office," Patricia continued, taking my coat and hanging it in the front closet. "Some last-minute crisis with the Morrison account. You know how it is." I did know, actually. The Morrison account was one of Harrison, industry's largest clients, and they'd been threatening to terminate their contract due to quality control issues in the manufacturing division. What Patricia didn't know was that I'd been the one to quietly suggest to Morrison's procurement director that they might want to reconsider their vendor relationships in the new year. "Of course," I said. "How can I help?" Patricia's face lit up with the particular satisfaction she always showed when I fell into line exactly as expected. "Well, the caterers are handling most of the heavy lifting, but I thought you could help with the table settings and perhaps assist with drinks once everyone arrives. You're always so good with that sort of thing." The sort of thing? As if my ability to pour wine and arrange napkins was the height of my capabilities. "I'd be happy to help," I replied, following her into the dining room where a table for 12 had been set with the Harrison family's finest china and crystal. As I spent the next 2 hours arranging flowers and polishing stemware, I found myself memorizing every detail of the room. The oil paintings of Harrison family patriarchs looking stern and distinguished. The antique sideboard that had belonged to Derek's great-grandmother. The crystal chandelier that Patricia loved to mention had been imported from Austria in the 1920s. All of it would still be here tomorrow, but the family that had owned it for 3 generations would be answering to me. The thought should have felt like triumph, but instead, it settled in my chest like a weight, heavy and final. By 6 o'clock, the house was filled with the warm light of candles and the soft murmur of conversation as family members began to arrive. I watched from the kitchen as Marcus and Natalie made their entrance, Natalie's laughter carrying through the house as she greeted Patricia with air kisses and compliments on the decorations. Derek arrived just as I was helping the caterers arrange appetizers on silver trays, his face flushed from the cold and stress evident in the tight line of his shoulders. He found me in the kitchen and pulled me aside, his voice low and urgent. "Thank God you're here," he said, kissing my cheek. "Mom's been in full hostess mode all day, and Marcus has been making comments about Dad's decisions at the company. I think he's positioning for more control of operations. Poor Derek. He had no idea that his brother's corporate ambitions were about to become irrelevant. In 3 weeks, Marcus would be reporting to me, assuming I decided to keep him on it all. Everything will be fine, I told him, straightening his tie and forcing a smile. Go say hello to everyone. I'll be out in a minute. As Derek rejoined the family gathering, I took a moment to compose myself in the kitchen's relative quiet. Through the doorway, I could see the Harrison family in their natural habitat. Patricia holding court near the fireplace, Richard nursing, A scotch and nodding along to whatever story Uncle James was telling, Marcus and Natalie positioned perfectly to catch every important conversation. They looked like what they were, a family that had never questioned their place in the world, never doubted that their wealth and status were deserved, never imagined that their empire could crumble from within. I picked up a tray of champagne, glasses, and walked into the living room, the perfect picture of the helpful daughter-in-law ready to serve. The champagne glasses clinked softly against each other as I moved through the Harrison family's living room, offering drinks with the practiced smile I'd perfected over 3 years of these gatherings. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone, familiar voices discussing stock portfolios, vacation homes, and the sort of social obligations that came with inherited wealth. "Victoria, dear, could you check on the appetizers?" Patricia's voice carried across the room, with that particular tone she used when giving instructions disguised as requests. "I want to make sure everything's perfect before we sit down." I nodded and retreated to the kitchen, where the catering staff was putting finishing touches on arrangements of smoked salmon and caviar that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. As I checked the presentation, my phone buzzed, with an encrypted message from my acquisition team. Harrison Industries board meeting moved to December 23rd. Emergency session regarding loan default. Recommend accelerating timeline. My pulse quickened as I read the message twice. Richard Harrison was moving faster than I'd anticipated, which meant the family was more desperate than they'd let on. I quickly typed back, "Understood. Proceed. As planned." Meeting scheduled for December 22nd. The timing was perfect, actually. While the Harrison family would be dealing with their financial crisis just 2 days before Christmas, I would be in my attorney's office signing the documents. That would make me their new boss. The poetic justice of it made me smile genuinely for the first time all evening. "Is everything all right in here?" Derek's voice came from behind me, and I turned to find him standing in the doorway looking concerned. "Just checking on the food," I said, slipping my phone back into my purse. "Your mother wants everything perfect." Derek stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I know this isn't exactly how you wanted to spend your evening. After the holidays, maybe we can plan a trip somewhere, just the two of us. Get away from all the family drama for a while." The offer was sweet, and 3 years ago it might have been enough. But now, looking at my husband's tired face and knowing that he had no idea his wife was about to fundamentally alter his family's fortune, I felt a strange mixture of affection and pity. "That sounds nice," I said, meaning it more than he could possibly understand. After the acquisition went through, we would definitely need time away from his family. We returned to the living room together, where Richard Harrison was holding court near the massive stone fireplace, his booming voice carrying over the general conversation. At 72, he still commanded attention when he spoke, his silver hair and expensive suit giving him the bearing of a man who'd built something significant with his own hands. "The manufacturing sector is stronger than it's been in decades," he was saying to a small audience of family members and family friends. "Harrison Industries is positioned for our biggest expansion yet. We're looking at acquisitions in 3 new markets come spring." I paused in my circuit around the room, tray balanced in my hands, and listened to Richard paint a picture of corporate success that bore little resemblance to the company's actual financial situation. The man was either a masterful liar or living in complete denial about how precarious his position had become. Marcus, who'd been nursing the same glass of wine for the past hour, finally spoke up. "Dad, are you sure this is the right time for expansion? I've been looking at the quarterly reports and our cash flow is perfectly healthy," Richard interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "Son, I appreciate your concern, but I've been running this company since before you were born. I think I know a thing or two about managing our resources." The tension in the room shifted perceptibly. Marcus's jaw tightened, and I caught Natalie shooting her husband a warning look. Even Derek seemed uncomfortable, shifting his weight. from foot to foot as he watched his father and brother face off. I continued my rounds with the champagne, invisible as always during family discussions about business. They had no idea that I knew more about Harrison Industries' financial position than anyone in the room, except possibly Richard himself. The company was bleeding money, propped up by increasingly creative accounting and loans secured against assets that were worth far less than the family believed. Actually, came a voice from the corner where Uncle James had been quietly observing. I heard some interesting rumors at the club last week. Something about a major investor circling Harrison Industries, looking for acquisition opportunities. The room went completely silent. Even the caterers seemed to pause in their movements, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere. Richard's face darkened. Rumors, James. Nothing more. The company isn't for sale, and it never will be. Harrison Industries stays in the family. Of course, James backpedaled quickly. I just thought you should know what people are saying. But the damage was done. I could see the wheels turning in Marcus's head, the way Patricia's hand tightened on her wine glass, the quick glance Derek shot in his father's direction. They weren't stupid people, and they'd all noticed. The signs, even if they hadn't been willing to admit them out loud. Patricia, ever the gracious hostess, smoothly redirected the conversation toward safer topics. Speaking of family businesses, Natalie, how is your charity auction planning coming along? As Natalie launched into a detailed description of her latest fundraising efforts, I excused myself to check on dinner preparations. In the kitchen, I found Carmen's latest text waiting. Just saw the news about Morrison pulling their contract. How are you holding up? I smiled as I typed back. Better than they are. Timeline moved up. This is happening sooner than expected. The Morrison contract cancellation would be announced officially on Monday, which would accelerate Harrison Industries' financial crisis by several weeks. By the time the family realized how serious their situation had become, I would already be in position to save them. Or destroy them, depending on how they chose to handle the revelation of who their savior actually was. Dinner was announced at 8 o'clock sharp, and I helped herd the family into the formal dining room where Patricia had outdone herself with the table setting. Crystal goblets caught the candlelight, silver gleamed against pristine white linens, and centerpieces of white roses and evergreen created an atmosphere of expensive elegance. I found myself seated at the far end of the table, next to Uncle James and across from Derek's cousin Sarah, who I'd met exactly 3 times in 3 years and who always looked at me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. The placement wasn't accidental. In the Harrison family hierarchy, I ranked somewhere between the hired help and actual family members. As the first course was served, conversation turned to holiday plans and travel schedules. Marcus and Natalie were flying to Aspen. For New Year's, Patricia and Richard were hosting their annual charity gala between Christmas and New Year's. Derek mentioned that we hadn't finalized our plans yet, shooting me an apologetic look across the table. Victoria, what did you do before you met Derek? Sarah asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the general chatter. I don't think anyone's ever mentioned it. The table went quiet again, all eyes turning toward me. It was the question no one had ever directly asked, though I'd seen it in their faces dozens of times over the years. What was Derek's wife's story? Where did she come from? What qualified her to marry into their world? I worked in consulting, I said smoothly, which was technically true. Corporate strategy and financial analysis. How interesting, Patricia said with the bright tone she used when she wanted to change subjects quickly. And where was that? Various firms in New York before I moved to Denver. I took a sip of wine, letting them make whatever assumptions they wanted about my career trajectory. Nothing as impressive as what Derek does, of course. Derek squeezed my hand under the table, his gesture both protective and slightly embarrassed. He'd always been sensitive about his family's tendency to treat me like an outsider, even as he'd never quite managed to stand up to them about it. Well, "We're certainly glad Derek found you," Richard said, raising his glass in a toast that somehow managed to sound both welcoming and condescending. Family is everything, after all. The irony of the toast wasn't lost on me. By their definition, a family, I would always be an outsider, someone who'd married in but never truly belonged. But by my definition, family meant people who supported and respected each other, which meant the Harrison family had disqualified themselves long ago. As dinner progressed through multiple courses, the conversation inevitably returned to business. Marcus was pushing harder than usual for more involvement in company operations, clearly sensing that changes were coming whether his father acknowledged them or not. "The market is shifting, Dad," he argued over the main course of lamb and roasted vegetables. "We need to be more aggressive about modernizing our approach, bringing in fresh perspectives." "Fresh perspectives," Richard repeated, his tone making it clear what he thought of that phrase. "Son, this company was built on proven principles and solid relationships. We don't need to chase every new trend that comes along." "But what about efficiency? What about competing with companies that are using new technologies, new systems?" Marcus's frustration was starting to show. "We're falling behind, and everyone can see it except—" "Except what?" Richard's voice carried a warning that everyone at the table recognized. Marcus looked around the table, his gaze stopping briefly on me before returning to his father. "Except the people who are supposed to be leading us into the future." The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Derek cleared his throat nervously. Patricia began discussing dessert options, with forced enthusiasm. Natalie studied her wine glass like it contained the secrets of the universe. I continued eating my lamb, playing the role of the wife who stayed out of family business discussions while internally cataloging every word of the conversation. In 3 days, Marcus's concerns about modernization and fresh perspectives would become my concerns. His frustration with his father's management style would become my problem to solve. The question was whether I would choose to work with Marcus or replace him entirely. His instincts about the company's problems were correct, but his approach was clumsy and confrontational. I would need people around me who understood both the business and how to handle delicate family dynamics, and I wasn't yet convinced that Marcus fit that description. After dinner, we moved back to the living room for coffee and dessert, where Patricia had arranged a beautiful display of petit fours and chocolate truffles. I resumed my role as the helpful daughter-in-law, ensuring everyone had coffee and offering. Seconds on dessert while the family settled into their familiar post-dinner routine of gossip and gentle needling. It was during this phase of the evening that I overheard the conversation that would change everything about my timeline. Patricia and Richard had stepped onto the enclosed back porch to discuss something privately, but their voices carried through the glass doors. I positioned myself near the coffee service, arranging cups that were already perfectly arranged, and listened. "The Morrison situation is worse than we told the kids," Richard was saying, his voice heavy with a stress I'd never heard before. "It's not just one contract. They're talking to 3 of our other major clients." Patricia's response was sharp, with panic barely held in check. "What does that mean for the company?" "It means we're looking at a potential loss of 40% of our revenue base in the first quarter, combined with the loan payments coming due." Richard's voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. "Maybe it's time to consider Marcus's suggestions about bringing in outside help," Patricia said quietly. "Or maybe we should look at that acquisition offer more seriously." "What acquisition offer?" Richard's voice was sharper now. "The one from Meridian Holdings, remember? They approached us through intermediaries last month about a potential partnership or buyout. You dismissed it without even looking at the terms." My heart stopped. They knew about my offer. Somehow, through all my careful planning and legal maneuvering, they already knew that Meridian Holdings was interested in acquiring their company. "I'm not selling my father's company to some faceless corporation," Richard said firmly. "We'll find another way," What if there isn't another way? Patricia's voice was smaller now, frightened. Richard, what if we lose everything? I stepped away from the coffee service before I could hear Richard's response, my mind racing. If they already knew about Meridian Holdings' interest, then my carefully planned reveal was going to be very different than I'd imagined. Instead of swooping in as their savior at the last moment, I would be stepping forward as someone who'd been circling their company like a vulture. The realization should have been disturbing, but instead I felt a strange sense of relief. No more pretending to be surprised by their financial troubles. No more acting like I didn't understand the implications of their business decisions. When the truth came out, it would come out completely. I rejoined the family gathering in the living room, where Derek was deep in conversation with his cousin about ski conditions in Vail. Marcus and Natalie were looking at something on Natalie's phone, probably social media photos from friends' holiday parties. Uncle James was dozing in his chair, worn out by the combination of good food and family drama. The evening was winding down in the way these family gatherings always did, with gradual departures and promises to get together again soon. But as I helped Patricia gather coffee cups and stack dessert plates, I found myself studying each family member with new eyes. In 3 days, these people would learn that their quiet daughter-in-law had been building a financial empire while they thought she was arranging flowers and planning dinner parties. They would discover that the woman they'd treated like hired help was about to become their boss. They would realize that every dismissive comment, every condescending smile, every assumption about my intelligence and capability had been carefully noted and would now inform how I chose to restructure their lives. Derek found me in the kitchen, as I was helping load the dishwasher, his face showing the exhaustion that always followed family gatherings. "Ready to head home?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "More than ready," I said, meaning it in ways he couldn't possibly understand. As we said our goodbyes and collected our coats, Patricia pulled me aside for one of her signature moments of false intimacy. "Victoria, darling, I just want you to know how much it means to have you as part of the family," she said, grasping my hands in both of hers. "I know we don't always express it properly, but you're such a blessing to Derek and to all of us." The words were perfectly chosen and delivered with apparent sincerity, but they felt hollow after 3 years of evidence to the contrary. Still, I smiled and squeezed her hands in return. "Thank you, Patricia. That means a lot." And it would mean even more in a few days, when she would need my blessing far more than I had ever needed hers. The drive home through Denver's quiet streets gave me time to process the evening's revelations. Derek dozed in the passenger seat, worn out by the family dynamics and probably the stress of work situations he couldn't fully control. The radio played soft jazz, and snow began falling again, creating a peaceful buffer between the Harrison family estate and the real world. By the time we reached our downtown loft, I had made my decision about how to handle the accelerated timeline. Instead of waiting until after Christmas to reveal my identity, I would move up the acquisition signing to December 22nd and schedule a meeting with the Harrison family for December 23rd. They would have 1 day to absorb the shock of learning that their salvation was coming from the daughter-in-law they'd spent 3 years underestimating. 1 day to adjust their understanding of who held the power in their family dynamic. 1 day to decide whether they wanted to work with me or against me as I took control of the company that had defined their identity for 3 generations. As Derek headed toward the bedroom, I poured myself a glass of wine and settled at my laptop to send the messages that would set the final phase of my plan in motion. My acquisition attorney, my financial team, my public relations consultant, all of them needed to understand that we were moving fast now. The last message I sent was to Carmen. "Christmas dinner just got a lot more interesting. Are you free December 23rd? I might need a witness." Her response came back within minutes. "Wouldn't miss it for the world. Should I bring popcorn?" I laughed out loud for the first time in hours. In 3 days, the Harrison family would learn. That their quiet, accommodating daughter-in-law had just bought their company. They would discover that the woman they'd been treating like a servant was about to become their employer. And I would finally be able to stop pretending that their approval mattered to me, because I would no longer need anything from them except their cooperation as I rebuilt their family legacy from the ground up. The morning of December 22nd arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that only comes after a Denver snowstorm. The city blanketed in pristine white that made everything look clean and new. I stood at my office window, watching the sun reflect off the snow-covered rooftops below, while my acquisition team made final preparations for the meeting that would change everything. My attorney, Robert Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, had been working around the clock to ensure every document was perfect. The conference room at his downtown firm looked like a war room, with stacks of papers, multiple laptops, and 3 different phone lines ready for the various parties involved in the transaction. "The Harrison family attorney will be here at 10, Robert said, checking his watch. Richard Harrison insisted on reviewing the terms one more time before signing, which suggests he's still hoping to find a way out of this. I adjusted my navy blue business suit, the same one I'd worn to close my first major deal 3 years ago. Today felt like a full-circle moment, except this time, the stakes were infinitely more personal. "Let him review whatever he wants," I said, settling into the leather chair at the head of the conference table. "The terms are non-negotiable, and he knows it. His company needs this deal more than I need his company." At exactly 10 o'clock, Richard Harrison walked through the conference room doors, flanked by his longtime attorney and a financial advisor I didn't recognize. At 72, he still carried himself with the bearing of a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room. But I could see the strain around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands as he set his briefcase on the table. "Mr. Harrison?" Robert said, standing to shake hands. "Thank you for coming. I believe you've reviewed the acquisition documents?" Richard nodded curtly, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on me with obvious confusion. "I expected to be meeting with the principals from Meridian Holdings. Is Ms. Chen joining us shortly?" The moment stretched like a held breath. I could have corrected him immediately, but something about his assumption that I was merely support staff, even here in a conference room full of legal documents, crystallized every frustration I'd felt over the past 3 years. "Actually, Mr. Harrison," I said, standing slowly and extending my hand. "I am Ms. Chen, Victoria Chen, CEO and sole owner of Meridian Holdings." The color drained from Richard's face so completely that for a moment I worried he might collapse. His attorney grabbed his arm, steadying him as the implications of my words sank in. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You're Derek's wife. You're Victoria Harrison." "I'm both," I replied calmly, gesturing for him to take a seat. "Victoria Chen was my name before I married your son, and it's the name under which I've built my investment portfolio. I maintained it for business purposes when I took Derek's name socially." Richard sank into his chair, his financial advisor leaning over to whisper urgently in his ear. I could see the man's mind racing, trying to reconcile the quiet daughter-in-law he'd known for 3 years with the businesswoman who now held his company's future in her hands. "How long?" he asked finally. "How long have you been planning this?" "I wasn't planning anything initially," I said, which was the truth. "I started investing seriously about 2 years ago, building a portfolio of companies and properties. Harrison Industries came to my attention 6 months ago when your debt-to-equity ratio became a matter of public record." Robert slid a folder across the table to Richard's attorney. "These are the final terms. Meridian Holdings will acquire 71% controlling interest in Harrison Industries for $42 million, which will cover all outstanding debts and provide working capital for operational improvements." Richard's attorney opened the folder, scanning the documents with the practiced eye of someone who'd negotiated countless deals, but I could see from his expression that he found no fault with the paperwork. The terms were generous, fair, and exactly what Harrison Industries needed to survive. "What about management?" Richard asked, his voice steadier now but still strained. "What about my sons?" "Marcus has been preparing to take over operations, and Derek will retain their current positions pending performance reviews," I interrupted gently. "Mr. Harrison, I'm not interested in destroying your family's legacy. I'm interested in preserving it. But that means making changes that should have been made years ago." The room fell silent, except for the soft scratch of pen on paper as Richard's attorney took notes. Through the conference room windows, I could see Denver's business district bustling with pre-holiday activity, people hurrying along sidewalks, with shopping bags and briefcases, completely unaware that a family dynasty was changing hands 20 floors above them. "I need to understand something," Richard said finally, looking directly at me. "Why? Why Harrison Industries specifically? With your resources, you could have invested in any number of companies." The question I'd been expecting, and the one I dreaded most, because the complete truth would sound petty and vindictive, even though the business case was solid. "Your company has excellent bones," I said carefully. "Good reputation, loyal client base, solid manufacturing capabilities, but it's been poorly managed from a financial perspective. Too much expansion, too much leverage, not enough attention to cash flow. I saw an opportunity to acquire a fundamentally sound business at a significant discount. It was all true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that I'd wanted to prove something to myself and to them. That the quiet wife they'd dismissed was capable of far more than they'd ever imagined." Richard studied my face for a long moment, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that he saw more than I'd intended to reveal. "And the timing?" he asked. "Right before Christmas? Right when we're most vulnerable?" "The timing was determined by your loan obligations, not by me," I replied. "January 2nd is your deadline. I'm offering you a solution with 10 days to spare." Robert cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should focus on the terms of the agreement. Mr. Harrison, do you have specific concerns about the proposed structure?" For the next 2 hours, we worked through the details of the acquisition. Richard's questions were sharp and informed, revealing a business acumen that his recent financial troubles had obscured. His attorney raised valid points about employee protections and operational continuity. By the time we broke for lunch, I found myself genuinely respecting the man across the table, even as I prepared to take control of everything he'd built. During the lunch break, I stepped outside for air and found 3 missed calls from Derek. When I called him back, his voice was tight with stress. "Vic, where are you? I've been trying to reach you all morning. There's something happening at the company, some kind of emergency meeting with Dad and the lawyers." My stomach clenched. "What kind of emergency meeting?" "I don't know. Dad's being secretive about it. But Marcus thinks it might be about the Morrison situation, or maybe that acquisition rumor Uncle James mentioned. I'm worried they're in more trouble than they've been letting on." Poor Derek. He had no idea that his wife was sitting in a conference room restructuring his family's entire future. "I'm sure it's just business," I said, hating the lie but knowing I had no choice. These things usually sound more dramatic than they actually are. Maybe. But Vic, if something happens to the company, if Dad loses everything, I don't know what that would do to him. Or to Mom. This business is their whole identity. The pain in his voice was real and sharp, and for a moment I questioned everything I was about to do. Derek loved his family despite their flaws. He would be caught, in the middle of whatever fallout came from my revelation. "Whatever happens," I said carefully, "we'll handle it together. That's what marriage means, right?" After I hung up, I stood on the sidewalk watching people hurry past, all of them wrapped up in their own concerns and complications. In 2 hours, I would own controlling interest in Harrison Industries. Tonight, I would have to figure out how to tell my husband what I'd done. Tomorrow, I would face his entire family as their new boss. The afternoon session moved more quickly than the morning. Richard had apparently spent the lunch break accepting his situation, because he returned to the conference room ready to sign. His questions now focused on implementation rather than resistance. "I assume you'll want to make management changes immediately," he said as Robert prepared the signature pages. "Some changes, yes, but I'm not interested in wholesale upheaval. The company's problems are structural and financial, not necessarily personnel-related." "And my position?" I had anticipated this question too. "You'll remain as chairman emeritus with an advisory role. Your experience and relationships are valuable assets. But day-to-day operations will report to me." Richard nodded slowly, the weight of 40 years of leadership settling on his shoulders. "And Derek? Marcus?" "Will be evaluated based on their performance and potential, just like every other employee. I don't make business decisions based on family relationships." The irony of that statement wasn't lost on either of us. At 4:30 in the afternoon, with Denver's winter sun already beginning to set, Richard Harrison signed the documents that transferred controlling interest of his family's company to his daughter-in-law. The signature was steady and decisive, the mark of a man who understood when he was beaten. "Congratulations, Ms. Chen," Robert said as we shook hands. "You're now the majority owner of Harrison Industries." The moment should have felt triumphant, but instead it felt surreal. 3 years ago, I'd been intimidated by this family's wealth and status. Now, I controlled both. Richard stood slowly, gathering his papers with the methodical movements of someone trying to maintain dignity in defeat. "When will you tell Derek?" he asked quietly. "Tonight." "And the rest of the family?" "Tomorrow. I think Christmas Eve is appropriate timing for a family meeting, don't you?" He almost smiled. At that, a ghost of appreciation for the dramatic timing. "Patricia is going to be surprised." "I imagine she will be." Richard extended his hand and I shook it, two business professionals concluding a transaction. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm beginning to understand why Derek fell in love with you. I just wish we'd seen this side of you sooner." The comment stayed with me as I drove home through Denver's evening traffic. Richard Harrison had just acknowledged that his family had underestimated me, but he'd also suggested that I'd hidden my true self from them. Both things were true, and I wasn't sure how I felt about either admission. Derek was already home when I arrived, sitting in our living room with a glass of whiskey and a stack of papers spread across the coffee table. He looked up when I walked in, his face a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Thank God you're home. I've been going crazy trying to figure out what's happening at the company." I hung up my coat carefully, buying myself a few seconds to prepare for the conversation that would change everything between us. "Derek, we need to talk." Something in my tone must have alarmed him, because he set down his glass and gave me his full attention. "What's wrong? You look like someone died." I sat down beside him on the couch, close enough to touch his hand, but far enough away to see his full reaction to what I was about to tell him. "Nobody died, but everything is about to change for your family, and I need you to understand my role in that change." Derek's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath and jumped into the deep end. This morning, I signed an agreement to purchase controlling interest in Harrison Industries. As of 4:30 this afternoon, I own 71% of your family's company. The silence that followed was profound and terrible. Derek stared at me as if I'd started speaking a foreign language, his brain apparently unable to process what I'd just told him. "That's not possible," he said finally. "You don't have that kind of money. We don't have that kind of money." "I do. I've been building an investment portfolio for the past 3 years through a company called Meridian Holdings, the same company your uncle mentioned at dinner the other night." Derek stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and then back again. 3 years? You've been hiding this from me for 3 years? Not hiding. Building. There's a difference. Is there? His voice was sharper now, anger replacing confusion. Because I've been going to work every day at a company my wife secretly owns, listening to my father worry about finances while you've been plotting to take over everything he's built. The accusation stung because it contained just enough truth to hurt. I wasn't plotting anything, Derek. I saw a business opportunity and I took it. The fact that it happened to be your family's business was initially coincidental. Initially? I met his eyes directly. Your family has spent 3 years treating me like I'm not smart enough to understand their conversations. Not successful. Enough to contribute to their world, not worthy enough to be considered a real member of their circle. After a while, proving them wrong became a priority. Derek sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. Oh my God. What's going to happen to my parents? To Marcus? To all the employees who depend on that company? Nothing bad, if everyone is reasonable about the transition. I didn't buy the company to destroy it, Derek. I bought it to save it. Your father's financial management has been disastrous, but the underlying business is sound. And you decided all of this without talking. To me? Without including me in decisions that affect my entire family? The question hung between us like a blade, because the truth was that I had excluded him, just as his family had excluded me. I'd built my empire in secret partly out of necessity, but partly out of a desire to prove that I didn't need their approval or support. I should have told you sooner, I admitted. But Derek, your family has never once asked me about my background, my education, my goals, or my capabilities. They decided who I was the day they met me, and nothing I've done in 3 years has changed their opinion. So you decided to buy their company. I decided to stop being invisible. Derek was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands while I watched emotions play across his face. Anger, confusion, hurt, and something that might have been respect. What happens now? He asked finally. Tomorrow I meet with your family, and we discuss the future of Harrison Industries under new management. Tonight, I hope my husband decides whether he's going to support me or stand with the people who've spent 3 years making me feel like I don't belong. Derek looked up at me then, really looked at me, as if he was seeing me clearly for the first time in our marriage. You've always belonged, Vic. You just never believed it. Because they never let me believe it. He reached for my hand, his grip warm and steady. What do you need from me? The question was simple, but it contained everything. Our marriage, our future, our ability to navigate the chaos that was about to engulf his family. I need you to trust that I'm doing this for the right reasons. And I need you to help me figure out how to rebuild relationships that have been broken for a long time. Derek squeezed my hand. Can you promise me that you won't destroy my family out of spite? I can promise you that spite was never the goal. Justice, maybe. Proving a point, definitely. But not destruction. He nodded slowly, decision settling over his features. Then I'm with you. God help me. I'm with you. We sat together in the gathering darkness, holding hands while snow began falling outside our windows. Tomorrow would bring revelations, confrontations, and the complete restructuring of family dynamics that had been set in stone for decades. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I felt like Derek and I were truly partners in something bigger than either of us could handle alone. Christmas Eve morning dawned gray and overcast, the kind of weather that made Denver feel smaller and more intimate than usual. I stood in my walk-in closet, choosing an outfit for what would either be the most important business meeting of my career or the most spectacular family implosion in Harrison history. Possibly both. I selected a charcoal gray dress with clean lines and a structured blazer, professional enough to command respect but not so severe as to seem antagonistic. The diamond earrings Derek had given me for our anniversary completed the look, a subtle reminder that I was still his wife, despite everything that was about to unfold. Derek emerged from the shower as I was applying the last touches of makeup, his face showing the strain of a sleepless night. We'd talked until nearly 3 in the morning, working through the implications of what I'd done and what it would mean for our marriage, his relationship with his family, and our future together. "Are you sure about the timing?" he asked, adjusting, his tie in the mirror beside me. "Christmas Eve seems almost cruel." "Your father moved up the emergency board meeting to today," I replied, checking my appearance one final time. "If I wait any longer, they'll make decisions based on incomplete information. The family needs to understand the full situation before they panic." Derek nodded, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his jacket. He was about to watch his wife reveal herself as the person who'd rescued his family from financial ruin, and he wasn't sure whether that made me a hero or a villain. "What do you want me to do when we get there?" he asked. "Be yourself. Support the truth. Help me navigate the emotional landmines that are about to explode all over your parents' living room." The drive to the Harrison estate took place in relative silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts about what the next few hours would bring. The snow from the previous day had been cleared from the roads, but it still clung to tree branches and rooftops, giving the world a pristine appearance. That felt at odds with the chaos we were about to unleash. Marcus's car was already in the driveway when we arrived, along with vehicles I recognized as belonging to Richard's attorney and financial advisor. Through the front windows, I could see figures moving around in what appeared to be heated discussion. "They started without us," Derek observed, his voice tight with anxiety. "Good. Let them work themselves into a panic. It will make my entrance more effective." Patricia answered the door before we could knock, her face showing the strain of whatever crisis had been unfolding inside. "Derek, thank goodness you're here. Victoria, I'm sorry, but this is really a family business matter." "Actually, Mrs. Harrison," I interrupted gently, "this concerns me more than anyone else in that room. May we come in?" Something in my tone must have registered, because Patricia stepped back without argument, her eyes narrowing as she studied my face with new attention. The living room was transformed into an impromptu war room, with papers scattered across every available surface and multiple phone lines active simultaneously. Richard sat behind his massive oak desk, looking older than his 72 years, while Marcus paced near the fireplace, his agitation evident in every sharp movement. "Derek," Marcus called out as we entered, "maybe you can talk some sense into Dad. He's considering some kind of buyout offer from a company called Meridian Holdings. It's corporate suicide." "It's survival," Richard corrected sharply. "We're hemorrhaging money, Marcus. The Morrison contract cancellation was just the beginning. 3 more clients have signaled they're reviewing their relationships with us. We need capital injection or we'll be bankrupt by February. So we sell to some vulture capitalist firm that will strip us for parts?" Marcus shot back. "There has to be another way." I cleared my throat, and the room fell silent as all eyes turned toward me. The moment had arrived, and despite all my preparation, my heart was pounding against my ribs like a caged bird. "There is another way," I said calmly. "The owner of Meridian Holdings is prepared to offer more favorable terms than any traditional acquisition firm would provide." Richard looked up from his papers, confusion evident on his face. "Victoria, how could you possibly know?" "Because I am Meridian Holdings," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the sudden silence. "I'm the owner, the CEO, and as of yesterday afternoon, the majority shareholder of Harrison Industries." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Marcus stopped pacing so abruptly he nearly stumbled. Patricia's hand flew to her throat, her face draining of color. The attorney's pen clattered to the floor, and even Richard, who'd known this moment was coming, seemed stunned by the reality of hearing it spoken aloud in front of the entire family. "That's impossible," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. You're Derek's wife. You don't have any money. You don't have any business experience. I have an MBA from Wharton and 3 years of experience building a private equity portfolio worth approximately $80 million. I replied evenly. Yesterday, I used $42 million of that to purchase controlling interest in your family's company. Patricia sank into the nearest chair, her hand pressed against her chest as if she were having trouble breathing. I don't understand. How is this possible? Where did you get that kind of money? I earned it, I said simply, through careful investments, strategic acquisitions, and the kind of financial planning your husband should have been doing for the past decade. Marcus exploded. You've been spying on us, gathering information, plotting against our family while pretending to be some harmless little wife. I've been saving your family, I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to cut through his outrage. While you've been arguing about modernization and your father has been ignoring cash flow problems, I've been positioning myself to prevent the complete collapse of Harrison Industries. You should be thanking me, not attacking me. Thanking. You? Marcus's face was flushed with anger and humiliation. You deceived all of us. You made us look like fools. You made yourselves look like fools, I replied coldly. I just provided the mirror. Derek stepped forward, placing himself physically between me and his brother. Marcus, that's enough. Whatever you think about Victoria's methods, she's right. About the company's situation. Dad's been telling us for months that everything was fine while secretly scrambling to avoid bankruptcy. Stay out of this, Derek, Marcus snapped. This is about your wife manipulating our family for her own gain. What gain? I asked, genuinely curious about his logic. I've just invested $42 million in a company that was headed for failure. I could have put that money anywhere and gotten better returns. I chose to invest it here because I saw potential that your family's mismanagement was wasting. Richard finally spoke, his voice heavy with exhaustion and something that might have been relief. She's right, Marcus. The company was dying. I've been lying to all of you about how bad things really were because I couldn't admit that I'd failed where my father and grandfather had succeeded. The admission hung in the air like smoke, acrid and undeniable. Patricia began crying quietly, the sound barely audible but somehow more devastating than any dramatic outburst would have been. So, what happens now? Derek asked, his question directed at me but his eyes on his father. What are your plans for the company? I walked to the mantelpiece, where 3 generations of Harrison family portraits looked down with expressions of stern disapproval. It seemed fitting to address those long-dead patriarchs along with their living descendants. First, we stabilize. Operations. The Morrison contract loss was significant, but not fatal if we move quickly to diversify our client base. I have contacts in 3 industries that could provide steady revenue streams while we rebuild. You have contacts, Marcus repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. In what industries? Technology, renewable energy, and medical device manufacturing. All growth sectors that your father's company is positioned to serve if we modernize the production facilities and upgrade the quality control systems. I could see Richard's attorney taking notes, his expression shifting from confusion to professional interest as he began to understand the scope of what I was proposing. Second, I continued, we need to address the management structure. Marcus, your instincts about modernization were correct, but your approach was too confrontational. Companies need evolution, not revolution. Marcus looked like he'd been slapped. Are you firing me? I'm offering you the chance to prove you can work collaboratively instead of constantly undermining your father's authority. The company needs both of your skill sets, but it needs them working together, not against each other. Patricia finally looked up from her tears. And Derek? What about Derek's position? Derek keeps his current role while we evaluate where his talents are best utilized. Unlike the rest of you, he's never treated me like I was too stupid to understand business, so he gets the benefit of the doubt. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Less shocked, more thoughtful. I could see mental gears turning as each family member began to process not just what I'd done, but what it meant for their individual futures. "I need to understand something," Patricia said, her voice steadier now. "Why? Why did you do this? Was it revenge for how we treated you?" The question I'd been dreading, because the answer was complicated and not entirely flattering to anyone involved. "Partly," I admitted. "For 3 years, you've treated me like I was too simple to understand your conversations, too inexperienced to contribute meaningfully to family discussions, too inferior to be considered a real member of your circle. At some point, proving you wrong became important to me. But also," I continued, "because Derek loves this family despite your flaws, and he would have been devastated if the company failed. Because this business employs 200 people who don't deserve to lose their jobs because of poor financial planning. And because, despite everything, I've come to care about preserving what previous generations of Harrisons built." Richard stood slowly, his movement drawing everyone's attention. He walked to where I stood by the mantelpiece and extended his hand. "I apologize," he said formally. "We misjudged you completely, and our company is alive today because of your intervention. I don't know how to thank you for that." The handshake was firm and respectful, the first time Richard Harrison had ever treated me as an equal rather than an accessory to his son's life. "You can thank me by helping make the transition smooth," I replied. "Your relationships and experience are valuable assets. I don't want to discard them out of spite." Marcus watched this exchange with obvious internal struggle, his pride warring, with his recognition that I'd just saved everything he'd been working to inherit. "What about the employees?" he asked finally. "Are you planning layoffs, restructuring?" "Some restructuring, yes. But I'm more interested in retraining and repositioning than elimination. Good people are harder to replace than outdated systems." Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her composure gradually returning. "I suppose I should thank you as well. Though I have to say, this isn't how I imagined spending Christmas Eve." "I imagine not. But Patricia, I need you to understand something. The way your family has treated me over the past 3 years made this moment inevitable. I spent too much time trying to earn respect that should have been freely given." "You're right," she said quietly. We were unkind, dismissive. I convinced myself we were protecting Derek from someone who might not understand our world. But the truth is, we never gave you a chance to show us who you really were." The admission was more than I'd expected, and it caught me off guard. For 3 years, I'd armored myself against their subtle rejections and condescending assumptions. I hadn't prepared for the possibility of genuine remorse. Derek moved to stand beside me, his presence warm and steadying. "So where do we go from here? As a family, I mean, not just as a business." It was the question that mattered most, and the one I was least prepared to answer, because taking over their company had been the easy part. Rebuilding relationships damaged by years of mutual misunderstanding would be far more challenging. "That depends on whether everyone can accept the new reality," I said. "I'm not Derek's quietly supportive wife anymore. I'm your boss, your business partner, and someone whose decisions will determine the future of everything you've worked for. Some of you may find that difficult to adjust to." Marcus surprised me by speaking first. "It'll be an adjustment. But Victoria, if you can save this company and keep our employees working, then I owe you more than an apology. I owe you my respect." The words sounded genuine, though I suspected it would take time for his actions to match his rhetoric. Richard's attorney cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should schedule a formal meeting to discuss operational details and transition planning. Today has been emotionally intensive for everyone." "Agreed," I said. But first, I have something else to address. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small wrapped package, which I handed to Patricia. Your Christmas gift. I bought it before yesterday's events, but it seems even more appropriate now. Patricia unwrapped the package with shaking fingers, revealing a small crystal paperweight engraved with the Harrison Industries logo and the words, "Founded 1952, Continuing Forward." I had it made to commemorate the company's history, I explained. Because despite everything that's happened, I want to honor what your family built before I start building on top of it. Patricia held the paperweight up to the light, tears starting fresh in her eyes. It's beautiful. Thank you. The gesture seemed to break the last of the tension in the room. Richard returned to his desk to gather papers. Marcus began helping. His mother collected tissues and coffee cups, and Derek squeezed my hand with what felt like genuine pride. One more thing, I said as the family began to disperse. Tomorrow is Christmas. I suggest we all take the day to process what's happened and spend time with our loved ones. The business will still be there on December 26th, and we'll have plenty of time to figure out our new working relationships. What about us? Derek asked quietly as his family moved toward other parts of the house. How do we figure out our new relationship? I turned to face him fully, seeing my husband clearly for what felt like the first time in months. We start by being honest about who we really are instead of who we thought we were supposed to be. And we go from there. Derek smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since I'd revealed my secret. I can work with that. Though I have to say, being married to a corporate mogul is going to take some getting used to. Just think of me as the same woman you fell in love with, except with better financial planning skills. And the ability to buy my family's company without breaking a sweat. That too. As we prepared to leave the estate, Patricia approached me one more time, her manner more hesitant than I'd ever seen it. Victoria, I know I have no right to ask this, but would you consider joining us for Christmas dinner tomorrow? As family, not as the person serving dinner. The invitation was everything I'd wanted 3 years ago and everything I'd stopped needing 6 months ago. But Derek's hopeful expression decided me. I'd like that, I said. As long as everyone understands that I'll be sitting at the table, not standing behind it. Patricia smiled, the expression more genuine than any she'd ever directed toward me. I think we can manage that. The drive home took place in comfortable silence, both Derek and I lost in our own thoughts about how dramatically our lives had changed in the span of 48 hours. The city looked different somehow, more welcoming, as if my revelation had shifted not just family dynamics, but my entire relationship with the world around me. So, Derek said as we pulled into our building's parking garage, what's it like being one of Colorado's most successful businesswomen? Ask me in a year, I replied, when I've figured out whether I can actually run the company I just bought. You'll figure it out. You always do. That night, as we lay in bed listening to the city settle into Christmas Eve quiet, Derek asked the question I'd been expecting. Do you regret any of it? The secrecy, the dramatic reveal, the way everything happened? I thought about it seriously, weighing the costs against the benefits, the damaged relationships against the preserved company, the personal satisfaction against the professional challenges ahead. I regret the secrecy, I said finally. I should have trusted you enough to include you from the beginning. But I don't regret saving the company, and I don't regret forcing your family to see me as something other than your quiet little wife. Derek pulled me closer, his arm warm, around my shoulders. For what it's worth, I never saw you as quiet, or little for that matter. No? No. I saw you as someone who was holding herself back for reasons I never understood. Now I understand. Christmas Eve drifted toward Christmas morning, and for the first time in 3 years, I fell asleep knowing that the next Harrison family gathering would find me sitting at the table instead of serving it. The knowledge felt like the best Christmas. gift I could have given myself. Christmas morning arrived with the kind of brilliant sunshine that only comes after fresh snow, the entire city of Denver sparkling like it had been dusted with diamonds. I woke in Derek's arms, both of us having slept better than we had in weeks, the weight of secrets finally lifted from between us. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Harrison," Derek murmured against my hair, his voice still thick with sleep. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Harrison," I replied, then paused. Though I suppose I should mention that Mrs. Harrison now owns the company that employs Mr. Harrison. Derek laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "I'm going to have to get used to being married to my boss. Think of it as job security." We spent the morning opening gifts and drinking coffee in our pajamas, a luxury we'd rarely allowed ourselves during our 3 years of trying to meet the Harrison family's expectations for holiday perfection. There was something deliciously rebellious about staying in our downtown loft instead of rushing to the estate for Patricia's elaborate Christmas breakfast. Around noon, Derek's phone began buzzing with messages from his family, checking to see if we were still planning to attend dinner. The uncertainty in their texts was palpable, nobody quite sure how to navigate this new family dynamic where the quiet daughter-in-law had become the person controlling their financial future. "Are you ready for this?" Derek asked as we finally began getting dressed for the drive to Highlands Ranch. I selected a deep emerald dress that I'd bought months ago but never worn, too afraid it might be considered too bold for a Harrison family gathering. Today, bold felt exactly right. "I've been ready for 3 years, I said, fastening the diamond necklace Derek had given me for our wedding. The question is whether they're ready for me. The Harrison estate looked different in the afternoon sunlight, less imposing and more like what it actually was. A beautiful home where people lived complicated lives and made imperfect decisions. Several cars were already in the driveway, including one I didn't recognize that belonged to Marcus's wife Natalie's parents, who'd apparently been invited to witness the first Christmas dinner featuring their daughter-in-law's new role as family, matriarch. Patricia answered the door wearing a smile that looked genuinely warm rather than diplomatically polite, the first time I could remember seeing her face completely unguarded. "Victoria, Derek, come in. Everything smells wonderful, and I think you'll really enjoy what the chef prepared." The casual mention of the chef was pointed, and I appreciated the gesture. No expectation that I would help with serving, no assumption that I would naturally gravitate toward the kitchen. I was arriving as a guest at my own family's Christmas dinner. The living room buzzed with conversation as family members gathered before the meal. Marcus approached me first, his manner more deferential than I'd ever experienced. "Victoria, I wanted to apologize again for my reaction yesterday. I spoke out of shock and, frankly, wounded pride. But I've spent the night thinking about what you accomplished, and I'm genuinely impressed." "Thank you, Marcus. Though I hope you understand that going forward, we'll need to find better ways to disagree than public confrontations." "Absolutely. I'm looking forward to learning from your approach to business strategy." The conversation felt stilted, but sincere, the beginning of what might eventually become a genuine working relationship. Natalie appeared at Marcus's side, her usual social smile replaced by something more thoughtful. "I have to confess," she said, "I always wondered what you did with your time during the day. I assumed shopping or maybe volunteer work, but private equity acquisition was definitely not on my list of possibilities." "I tried to mention my background a few times over the years," I replied diplomatically, "but the conversations always seemed to move in other directions." Natalie had the grace to look embarrassed. "We weren't very good at listening, were we? People hear what they expect to hear. I just learned to manage expectations more carefully." Richard emerged from his study carrying a manila folder thick with documents, his expression mixing business focus with familial warmth. "Victoria, I hope you don't mind, but I brought some preliminary reports on our operational efficiency metrics. I thought you might want to review them before we start making major changes." The offer was both professional courtesy and olive branch, acknowledging my new role while showing that he planned to contribute constructively to the transition. I'd appreciate that. Your institutional knowledge is going to be crucial for making smart decisions going forward. Derek squeezed my hand as we watched his father and me navigate our first conversation as business partners rather than reluctant in-laws. The shift in dynamics was subtle but unmistakable. Respect replacing tolerance in ways that transformed the entire atmosphere. Dinner was announced at exactly 2 o'clock, and as we moved toward the dining room, I realized that Patricia had completely rearranged the seating chart from previous family gatherings. Instead of being relegated to the far end of the table, I found myself seated at Richard's right hand, the traditional position of honor for the family's most important guest. I hope this arrangement works for everyone, Patricia said as we took our seats. It seemed appropriate given our new circumstances. The meal itself was spectacular, prepared by the same catering company that had provided food for Harrison family gatherings for over a decade. But instead of watching from the kitchen as servers brought out each course, I sat at the table participating in conversations about everything from Denver's changing skyline to political developments in Washington. Halfway through the main course, Marcus raised his wine glass in what I assumed would be a traditional family toast. Instead, he surprised everyone by directing his words specifically toward me. I'd like to acknowledge someone who's been sitting at this table for 3 years, while we failed to recognize her accomplishments or appreciate her contributions to our family. Victoria, what you've done for Harrison Industries goes beyond business. You've saved something that means everything to multiple generations of our family, and you did it while we were too blind to see your capabilities. The toast was more than I'd expected and more than I'd realized I needed. Around the table, family members raised their glasses with expressions ranging from genuine admiration to slightly embarrassed acknowledgement of their past behavior. To Victoria, Patricia added, and to the future of Harrison Industries under leadership that understands both business excellence and family values. As we drank the toast, I felt something shift inside me, a tension I'd been carrying for 3 years finally beginning to release. These people were flawed and had treated me poorly at times, but they were also Derek's family, and they were genuinely trying to make amends for their mistakes. After dinner, as the family gathered in the living room for coffee and dessert, Richard approached me with a proposition I hadn't anticipated. Victoria, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding operational efficiency. What would you say to the idea of creating a family advisory board for major business decisions? I'd like to remain involved, and I think Marcus has valuable insights to contribute, but you would have final authority on all strategic choices. The suggestion was thoughtful and practical, acknowledging both my ownership stake and the value of institutional knowledge. I think that could work very well, but I'd want Derek involved too, assuming he's interested in taking on additional responsibilities. Derek looked up from his conversation with Natalie's parents, clearly surprised to be included in business planning discussions. Are you serious? You want me on the advisory board? You have good instincts and you understand both the family dynamics and the company culture. Plus, it might be helpful to have someone who can translate between my management style and your family's communication patterns. The afternoon progressed with a naturalness that previous Harrison family gatherings had never achieved, without the underlying tension of unspoken resentments and misunderstood capabilities. Conversations flowed more freely and authentically. Patricia cornered me during a quiet moment while others were examining Richard's collection of antique railroad memorabilia. Victoria, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. Do you think you can forgive us? Not professionally, but personally. Do you think we can build a real relationship after how poorly we treated you? The question was vulnerable and direct, showing a side of Patricia I'd never seen before. I think forgiveness is something that happens gradually, through changed behavior rather than grand gestures. But yes, I'm willing to try if you are. I am. And I want you to know that I'm proud to have you as part of this family. I always should have been, but I'm particularly proud now that I understand what kind of person you really are. As evening approached and family members began making departure preparations, Marcus approached me with a business question that revealed how seriously he was taking our new working relationship. Victoria, I've been reviewing our client retention strategies, and I think we're missing opportunities in the renewable energy sector. Would you be open to discussing some expansion possibilities after the holidays? Absolutely. In fact, I already have some contacts in that industry who might be interested in partnership arrangements. Why don't you put together a preliminary analysis and we can schedule a meeting for next week? The easy transition into business planning showed how much the family dynamic had shifted in less than 24 hours. Marcus was treating me as a legitimate business partner. Richard was offering his expertise rather than defending his territory, and Derek was beginning to see himself as a bridge between my management approach and his family's established relationships. As Derek and I prepared to leave, Patricia handed me a small wrapped package. "One more Christmas gift," she said. "I had this made several months ago, but I never found the right moment to give it to you." Inside the package was a beautiful silver picture frame containing a photo from Derek's and my wedding day, but not one of the formal posed shots. Instead, it captured a candid moment during the reception when Derek was whispering something in my ear that had made me laugh with genuine delight. "I've always loved this photo because it shows how happy you make Derek. I wanted you to have it so you'd know that even when I didn't express it well, I always appreciated what you brought to his life." The gift was more meaningful than any expensive jewelry or designer accessory could have been, because it represented Patricia seeing me as Derek's partner, rather than as an interloper in the family circle. The drive home took place in comfortable conversation about everything that had changed and everything that might happen next. Derek was excited about the possibility of taking on a larger role in company operations, while I was already planning how to implement the modernization strategies that would ensure Harrison Industries' long-term success. "So, how does it feel?" Derek asked as we pulled into our building's parking garage. "Getting everything you wanted?" I considered the question seriously, because the answer was more complicated than it might seem. "It feels like finally being able to breathe freely," I said. "For 3 years, I've been holding myself back, trying to fit into a version of myself that your family might approve of. Today was the first time I felt like I could just be who I actually am." "And who is that?" "Someone who's good at business, cares about people, and refuses to be underestimated anymore." That evening, as we sat in our living room looking out at Denver's twinkling skyline, Derek asked the question I'd been waiting for. "What happens next? I mean, beyond the business restructuring and family relationship repair, what happens to us?" It was the most important question, because everything else was meaningless if our marriage couldn't survive the seismic shifts of the past few days. "We build something new," I said. "A partnership based on honesty instead of assumptions, respect instead of accommodation, shared goals instead of separate lives that happen to overlap." "I'd like that. Though I have to admit, I'm still processing the fact that my wife is now one of the most powerful business people in Colorado. I'm still processing it too. But Derek, the power isn't what matters. What matters is that we can finally be authentic with each other and with your family." 6 months later, I sat in the executive conference room at Harrison Industries, reviewing quarterly reports that showed the company's most profitable period in over a decade. The operational improvements we'd implemented were exceeding projections. Our client base had diversified significantly, and employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements in workplace morale. Marcus knocked on the conference room door, carrying a folder of expansion proposals that had become our weekly ritual. His transition from resentful family member to engaged business partner had been one of the most surprising successes of the entire acquisition. The renewable energy contracts are exceeding expectations, he reported, settling into the chair across from me. We're looking at a potential 30% increase in that sector alone if we can secure the manufacturing capacity. What's your recommendation? I think we should consider acquiring the Henderson facility in Colorado Springs. It would give us the production capability we need and create about 50 new jobs. The proposal was sound, and I appreciated that Marcus had learned to present solutions rather than just problems. Our working relationship had evolved into something I genuinely valued, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to the company's success. Put together a full acquisition analysis and we'll discuss it at Friday's board meeting. As Marcus left to return to his office, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. The quiet wife who'd served drinks at family gatherings had become the CEO of a thriving manufacturing company. The woman who'd felt invisible in her husband's family circle was now respected as both a business leader and a family member. Derek appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie after what had apparently been a challenging day in the sales department. "How did the client presentation go?" I asked. "Better than expected. I think we're going to land the Morrison contract, after all." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Morrison, the client whose departure had accelerated Harrison Industries' financial crisis, was now eager to return based on our improved quality control and competitive pricing. "Any regrets?" Derek asked, settling onto the couch in my office where we often had these end-of-day conversations. "About which part?" "Any of it. The secrecy, the dramatic revelation, completely upending our family's power structure." I considered the question while looking out the window at the Denver skyline, where cranes and construction equipment showed the city's continued growth and evolution. "I regret the secrecy," I said honestly, "but I don't regret proving that I was capable of more than anyone imagined. And I don't regret saving this company or the jobs that depend on it." "What about us? Do you regret how it affected our relationship?" "Our relationship is stronger now than it ever was when it was built on incomplete truth and unequal respect. So no, I don't regret that either." Derek smiled, the expression warm and proud. "Good. Because I love being married to a woman who can buy companies and restructure industries before lunch. Just don't expect me to make dinner too. I'm still figuring out this work-life balance thing." As we prepared to leave the office and head home to our downtown loft, I thought about the journey that had brought me from invisible daughter-in-law to respected business leader. The path hadn't been easy, and there had been costs along the way, but it had led to something I'd never expected: the ability to be fully myself in every aspect of my life. The Harrison family's Christmas dinner the following year was a study in transformed relationships. I sat at the head of the table, not because I'd demanded the position of honor, but because it felt natural for the person who'd guided the family business to its most successful year in 2 decades. Patricia had learned to ask thoughtful questions about my business strategies and career background. Marcus brought investment proposals to family gatherings and genuinely valued my input. Richard served as chairman emeritus with dignity and grace, contributing wisdom without trying to reclaim control he'd willingly transferred. And Derek had evolved into the kind of partner I'd always hoped to have, someone who saw my success as our success and supported my ambitions without feeling threatened by them. As we raised our glasses for the traditional family toast, I reflected on what I'd learned about power, respect, and the courage required to stop accepting less than you deserve. The woman who'd once served dinner to people who looked through her had become someone who could no longer be ignored or underestimated. The quiet wife had transformed into a leader whose decisions affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in revenue. But perhaps most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to be invisible anymore. 3 years ago, if someone had told me I would own Harrison Industries, I would have laughed at the impossibility. But impossibility is often just another word for a challenge that requires patience, planning, and the willingness to bet on yourself when nobody else will. The Harrison family had spent years assuming they knew who I was and what I was capable of. They'd learned, as I had, that assumptions can be expensive when they're wrong. Now, as I looked around the dinner table at faces that showed genuine respect and affection, I realized that the best revenge truly is success, not because it hurts the people who underestimated you, but because it forces them to see you clearly for the first time. And sometimes, when people finally see you clearly, they discover they actually like what they see. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.